once again, everybody, it's Chris Bezanoy with icecan.com and, of course, Ice TV. Today we're going to be talking about GxP. Specifically, what the heck is GxP? We're not going to go too far in depth. I'm just going to give you a nice brief overview. It's something you should know and be aware of when you're producing, or at least when you're constructing your cannabis production facility. So let's dive right in. As you can see here, we have our medium-sized facility. We've used the same facility design for our Facility Design 101 series. Go ahead and watch that whole thing. It's important to note where we are in the facility, what certain operations happen within the facility. I do mention GxP in those videos along the way. And so if you watch that whole series and you get to this point right now, you'll be able to understand basically what I was talking about. So GxP, as we continue along, the G stands for good. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. Doesn't change no matter where you are in any country. Good stays the same. The X is the variable, and P stands for practice or practices. So in other words, it's a good something practices. Generally speaking, it's the same no matter where you are in the world. It's a GxP for certain things. In this specific case, in this particular case, it's based on cannabis production. The X, as I mentioned before, is a variable. There are many different variables out there, but generally speaking for cannabis specifically, we're going to start off with what we call production. So a GPP, a good production practice. And what that essentially entails is that anything that has to do with the growing of cannabis. So we're going to look at these rooms here and essentially the flower rooms. So it could be mother, clone, flower, it could be veg, it could be all these rooms here. Even lab, to some extent, it could be a lab. The point is it's a good production practice on how you're producing cannabis. It's the growing cycle. It's everything you're doing within those rooms to ensure that the quality of product is there. And of course, traceability, how to track that product to make sure that it's done properly, it's traceable, you know exactly what room it came from, exactly what grow it came from. It's also in assisting with returns in case something should happen to go wrong. It's how governments track to make sure there's a recall and know where that product came from. It's also basically a standard that says, hey, generally speaking, you should grow in these type of environments. You should have these type of SOPs to govern how you grow, that sort of thing. So good production practices specific to cannabis. Now, as we move along, we've got the M, which is another variable. So GMP stands for good manufacturing practices. Those are the manufacturing rooms. So we're going to sit right here. We're talking trimming, drying, packaging, essentially, and to some extent, obviously, extraction. So it's the manufacturing of the product. For cannabis specifically, it's how you trim, the type of room you trim in, it's how you dry, the type of drying method you use, it's how you're packaging the product, and it's how you're extracting the product. Again, these are all standards that are generally accepted worldwide. It's the GxP standard. In, let's say, Europe, they've adapted the EU GxP standard. Sometimes you'll see a C in front of GxP, and that stands for current. So CGMP or CGxP stands for current manufacturing practices or current production practices. Either way you look at it, it's a globalized standard that is involved with drugs, it's involved with any sort of food, any sort of things you ingest, anything that's meant for human consumption. That's where the GxP standards come in. In this case, again, specifically for cannabis, we're now talking about the GMP side of things, the good manufacturing processes, or practices rather. There is also something known as the GACP, which is the good agricultural and collection practices. That's meant for mainly agricultural, so growing corn, how you collect that corn, all that kind of stuff. Either way you look at it, it's very important to know the GxP standards that of the countries that you are hoping to export to. As an example, in the EU GxP, we're going to say GMP, good manufacturing practices. It's a generalized standard that's found in the EU, but certain countries can either adopt that standard as a baseline and add on to it, or just consider that to be the standard moving forward. Germany, as an example, they do follow the EU GMP guidelines, but they have different standards that they have adopted for that country that are a bit higher than most of other countries in the EU. So you just got to make sure your consultants that you hire, maybe yourself, you know exactly what those GMP standards are, GxP standards. Either way you look at it, pretty simply, GxP is just standards that have been adopted per country that basically governs how you produce or how you manufacture things that are going to be consumed by humans, foods, drugs, that sort of thing. There's GMP, good manufacturing practices, GPP, good production practices, GACP, good agricultural and collection practices. There are other things. There's GAP, which is just good agricultural practice. There's a whole bunch of GXPs, and cannabis has and does fall within those categories. There's also, anything in the way of how you document. So GDP is good documentation practices. There's a whole bunch of GXPs out there, and cannabis production is no different. So just make sure that you know how you're building out your facility. In Canada, I can say for sure, they really just go by the GPP. They really don't have a GMP standard that they like to at least announce. So it's just basically good production practices. Again, your rooms will have to abide by GMP just as a good baseline. In the States, there really isn't a standard out there right now for cannabis production specifically. It will follow basic guidelines that have been done in Canada. We've got the EU GMP standards or the EU GxP standards in Europe. And these are all obviously enforceable and obviously created to make sure that we as human beings consume the right products without any undue hardship. So you may want to check like the European Medicines Agency, the EMA. You may want to check the FDA, which is the Food and Drug Administration. Health Canada also has their own standards. Either way, GxP, good for you to know. Pretty straightforward when it comes to the explanation of what GxP is, but I assure you what's found in each and every GPP, GMP, GACP is pretty extensive. So make sure you hire the right consultant. If you're not sure who to hire, come to us. We do know a lot of great people all over the world that can help you. Either way, be mindful of GxP. Thanks for watching. Talk to you soon. This informative video was brought to you by icecan.com, the industry's first marketplace for new and used equipment. Whether you're looking for brand new equipment for your cannabis venture, maybe you're looking for some used equipment, we can easily source that for you and ship it to you anywhere in the world, right to your front doorstep. Maybe you're looking for some services. We know a lot of great people in this industry. You've been around for the past 10 years. We can easily help you and refer you to anybody that you may need, whether it's advisory services, regulatory compliance, maybe you're looking for some funding for your cannabis venture. Either way you look at it, we can easily help source that consultancy or that service you may need. Once again, thanks for watching. This is ICE TV, brought to you by icecan.com.